This is my presentation on interpersonal communication, specifically focusing on enlarging the conversation. What I mean by enlarging the conversation is, how do I make meaning deeper and more clear together with my fellow human beings, primarily with my family, friends, coworkers, and even with those I have minimal contact with as I move throughout each day? How do I conduct myself communicatively around others in such a way as to lessen the occurrence of poor communication? The overarching goal: to formulate deeper relationships. Jesuit psychologist John Powell once said, "What I am at any given moment in the process of my becoming a person will be determined by my relationships with those who love me or refuse to love me, with those I love or refuse to love." So much of what is written in many interpersonal communication writings goes back to this very idea. Who I am, what beliefs I hold dear, and how I perceive others is a direct result of the many experiences and individuals I have come in contact with over the years. Both verbal and nonverbal communication has affected me in some way. Every teasing word, raised voice, or compliment, every glance in my direction, smile, glare, thumbs up, handshake, or shove on the playground literally shaped and molded my being. In addition, we now live in a world that thrives on technology and social networking. How has the digital age of texting and chatting as a primary form of intercommunication changed my ability to have a positive effect on others as I enlarge the conversation? The answer to this question is probably very different for me than for any one of my teenage daughters. But the bottom line is this: what can make enlarging the conversation difficult for myself or for anyone is not knowing exactly who I am. Am I secure in my identity? If I'm going to be able to do more enlarging of the conversation with others, I have to be willing to be open and share with others. A certain amount of self-disclosure or sharing of my true self is necessary as I expose my true self to others. I can only hope that they accept me without judgment. My goal is to do the same for others. According to Stewart, when I can perceive and listen to you as a person while being available as a person to you, and when you can do the same thing, then the communication between us is called dialogue. I learned through Carbonell's How to Solve the People Puzzle that my personality type falls into the category I see. The excitement that comes from finally understanding and accepting myself as being someone who is on one hand outgoing and people-oriented, while on the other hand is inexplicably passive and task-oriented, is hard to describe. Now that I can easily see what tends to motivate me, how I lead, how I follow, what my strengths and weaknesses are, I cannot help but be more in tune to myself as a person. I know how to make adjustments that will facilitate reaching my overarching goal. Past experience has proven that certain factors have inhibited my ability to have meaningful conversations with others. Madeline Burley Allen mentions in her book, Listening, the Forgotten Skill, biased listening, semantics as a barrier, and red flag words or hot button topics. Sadly, my husband can be the target of my listening bias. When he is talking to someone about a subject I have found to be boring or beyond my attention span, I worry that the other person is feeling burdened by the conversation as I would have been. So I intervene at times. This action on my part is due to my personal bias and is unfair to my husband. Also, when I find that I'm directly being spoken to and feel I already have my mind set, I realize I'm being biased as well. Barriers dealing with words themselves are difficult to deal with because language and conversation is almost entirely with the use of words. But Burley Allen emphasizes that certain words can have different effects on different people. The meanings or semantics behind the words or phrases being used are all dependent upon how the person hearing the words perceive them. That is why some words or phrases that are just considered red flag or words that can conjure specific strong emotions aren't necessarily bothersome for others. One of those phrases for me is, "If you would just look at this logically." Even though the meaning of this phrase might be to logically break down the situation to better see the whole picture, all I hear is, "You are looking at this illogically, which makes me feel like I have to defend myself before we even really begin a good conversation. Another barrier I personally feel can keep me from reaching my overarching goal is the ignorance of others. Depending upon your past experiences, you may perceive my statement in a very negative way, but what I mean is I have learned a lot from this course and I will attempt to put as much of it into practice as possible. But what about the many others who, like myself, prior to taking this course, didn't really have a clue as to what needs to happen in order to be a better communicator? Will the responsibility fall entirely on my shoulders as I work to enlarge the conversation with those around me? When I realized that our experiences throughout our lifetime is what gives meaning to every thought or word that is spoken, there is no way to go back to my old way of frustrated and failed attempts at making meaning with others. I am armed with so much more information about myself and about what I need to be aware of. Each conversation I have is not simply about a method to relay information, but rather an opportunity for sharing our life experiences with others through us being us and accepting others as who they are. Stewart wrote that much of what's going on in a conversation is as old as the participants themselves or older. In other words, the conversation didn't just start at the moment we began to speak. It began well before that. Looking back over the 8 weeks I spent learning to enlarge my conversation, one conversation stands out in my mind that I'd like to share with you, and it is about Paul. I'm not referring to Paul the disciple, but Paul, my coworker. Robert McCloskey once said, quote, "I know that you believe you understand what I said, but I'm not sure you realized that what you heard is not what I meant." Paul is outgoing, dynamic, and like myself, feels as though he is a good communicator. One conversation in particular we had ended up very heated and tense and caused us to shut down towards each other. Looking back now, I can see that it was wrought with scenes of what not to do from each of the texts in this course. Each of us had given understandably meaning to what was being said according to our personal experiences. Each of us believed we were right and needed to prove so to the other. Neither of us knew how to move on in the conversation, or what Stewart refers to as nexting. We were definitely not making meaning together. Throughout this course, however, Paul has asked me with small talk how my class has been going, and I have been very open about the things I have been learning. I shared with him the epiphany I had when I read Burley Allen's words about meanings coming from people and not from the words themselves. He agreed, and we talked more about it, as well as other things that I had learned. Paul was so excited and receptive to the information because he does feel he's a good communicator and, like me, would like to be even better. He asked me to help him find his personality pattern with the help of Dr. Carbonell, and he photocopied it to share with his girlfriend. Our working relationship is so much better because, as Stewart described, he allowed me to, quote, happen to him, and vice versa. I feel this was the beginning of real dialogue for the two of us, and I am very pleased with the results. I have successfully enlarged the conversation for myself and Paul, and this is the goal I continue to reach with everyone I interact with. Thank you.